Hello, this is Bob Edwards, and welcome to Section 2 of Lesson 5 in our online course, Equality for Women in Christ. In the first section of Lesson 5, we saw that a 12th century monk named Gratian concluded that women should be prohibited from bearing witness to the works of God, teaching in the church, and holding positions of leadership in the church. By examining the book of Acts, we saw that women could indeed bear witness to the work of God, as they did at Pentecost, and teach, just as Priscilla taught a man the way of God more accurately. When we examine the book of Romans, we can also see that the Bible does indeed endorse the leadership of women in the church. Phoebe is one example of a woman who was called by God to be a leader in the early church. In Romans chapter 16, Paul used the following words to introduce Phoebe and commend her ministry. "And I commend you to Phoebe, our sister, being a ministrant, diakonos, of the assembly that is in Cenchrea, that ye may receive her in the Lord, as doth become saints, and may assist her in whatever matter she may have need of you. For she also became a leader of many." The Greek word is prostatis, "and of myself." And we find that in Romans chapter 16, verses 1 and 2. Two Greek words in this passage help us to understand Phoebe's role in the church. The first word is diakonos. The Apostle Paul often used this word to describe a person's role in the church. In this context, diakonos is typically translated as either minister or deacon. And here are some examples from the New Testament. Who then is Paul, and who is Apollos, but ministers, diakonoi, through whom you believed, as the Lord gave to each one? We find that in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 5. Another example reads as follows: "And we have such trust through Christ toward God, not that we are sufficient of ourselves to think of anything as being from ourselves, but our sufficiency is from God, who also made us sufficient as ministers, diakonus, of the new covenant." That's 2 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 4 and 6. And another passage is found in Ephesians chapter 3, verses 5 through 7. "As it has now been revealed by the Spirit to his holy apostles and prophets, that the Gentiles should be fellow heirs of the same body, and partakers of his promise in Christ, through the gospel, of which I became a minister, diakonos, according to the gift of the grace of God given to me by the effective working of his power." And another verse is found in Philippians chapter 1, verse 1. "Paul and Timothy, bondservants of Jesus Christ, to all the saints in Christ Jesus who are in Philippi, with the bishops and deacons, diakonoi." And yet another verse we find in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 8. "Likewise deacons, diakonu, must be reverent, not double-tongued, not given to much wine, not greedy for money." With the aim of translating Paul consistently when describing a person's role in the church, Phoebe is referred to in some English translations as a minister. For example, "But I commend to you Phoebe, our sister, who is minister, diakonos, of the assembly which is in Cenchrea." In other translations, she is referred to as a deacon. For instance, "I commend to you our sister Phoebe, a deacon, diakonos, of the church in Cenchrea. Complementarian or patriarchal theologians reject the notion that Phoebe can properly be referred to as a deacon. They also do not believe that women can be ordained ministers in local church assemblies. This belief is summarized on one complementarian website in the following manner, and I quote, "The term diakonos is used of an office with special requirements that women cannot meet. Deacons likewise must be men of dignity," we find in 1 Timothy 3:8. End quote. The author of this website underlines the part of the sentence that contains the phrase, "deacons must be men," apparently to emphasize his point. The problem with this particular English translation is that no Greek manuscripts actually state that deacons must be men. This imperative phrase is added to the text by the translators of the New American Standard Bible, or NASB for short. Greek manuscripts simply read diakonou hosatos semnous, deacons likewise honorable. Added words in this English translation make the role of deacon appear gender specific, when in fact it is not. The same complementarian website also attempts to exclude women from the role of deacon on the basis of the Apostle Paul's comments in 1 Timothy 3:12. "Let deacons be husbands of only one wife, and good managers of their children and their households." From this passage, it is inferred that deacons must be male, since women cannot be husbands. Paul is not, however, providing instructions regarding the mandatory sex of deacons. He is prohibiting the practice of male polygamy. Certain rabbinical schools in the 1st century AD permitted polygamy for Jewish men. In his letter to Timothy, Paul makes it clear that this practice is not to be endorsed by Christian leaders. In spite of patriarchal additions to the text of 1 Timothy 3:8 and attempts to take Paul's ban on polygamy out of context, the Greek text of the New Testament indicates that a woman named Phoebe was indeed a diakonos, deacon, or minister of the church in Cenchrea. In addition to being referred to as a diakonos, Phoebe was also called a prostatis. We see that in Romans 16, verse 2. Prostatis is the noun form of a frequently used verb in the New Testament, proistemi. According to Strong's Concordance, prostemi or prostemai carried the following meanings: to put before, to set over, to rule. In his first letter to Timothy, the Apostle Paul used this word to refer to church elders who rule, prostotes, well. And that's 1 Timothy 5:17. In the same letter, he also used the word to refer to bishops and deacons, who must demonstrate their ability to lead in the church by first managing, prostemenon, prostemenoi, their households well. We find that in 1 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 and 13. In his letter to the Romans, Paul used the word again to encourage leaders in the church to exercise their spiritual gift diligently. And I quote, "If your gift is to lead, proistamenos, do it diligently." That's in Romans chapter 12, verses 6 through 8. All of these passages use a verb form of prostatis to describe the function of leadership in either a church or a household setting. In its noun form, prostatis was used frequently throughout ancient Greek literature. Here are some notable examples that are relevant to our New Testament text. In some Greek city-states, prostati, the plural of prostatis, functioned as the executive of the Council of Elders. Another example, two prostati presided over the council of the Aetolian League. And in a religious setting, prostati would authorize the payment of the priesthood. In Xenophon's Memorabilia, a prostatis functioned as a teacher, a mentor, and a guardian. And in the histories of Diodorus Siculus, a prostatis was a benevolent leader, one contrasted with a tyrant. The leadership of another woman in the 1st century AD was referred to using the Greek word prostasian. Her name was Junia of Theodora, and she was renowned for her political influence and support of refugees. And according to the Perseus Online Lexical Resources, prostasia means a standing before or leadership. And an inscription from the 2nd century BC explains that women who functioned in this role assumed the same offices traditionally held by men. According to the original Greek language of the New Testament, this type of leadership role was filled in the Church of Cenchrea by a woman named Phoebe. Many English versions of the Bible do not translate Paul's language consistently when he's discussing a person's role in the church. When a person is assumed to be male, words like minister, deacon, rule, manage, and lead are used. In the case of Phoebe, however, she is referred to as a helper, an assistant, or a kind friend. All of these English translations follow the tradition established by St. Jerome's Vulgate, who substituted the Latin word adstitit, to stand near or at one side, for the Greek word prostatis, to stand before or stand at the head of, in the case of Phoebe. Paul's original language and context are ignored, while patriarchal bias makes the Bible appear to exclude women from ministry and leadership roles that are allegedly reserved for men alone. In direct contrast to the thinking of Jerome from the 4th century AD and the conclusions of Gratian in the 12th century AD, the New Testament books of Acts and Romans tell us that women may indeed bear witness to the works of God, teach men in the church, and hold positions of leadership in the church. And in our next section of Lesson 5, we will look at yet another example of a woman who was a leader in the church. Her name was Junia, and she is described in the book of Romans as outstanding among the apostles.